board discussion. You all got the guiding questions that we'll be looking at today. Wanted you to have an opportunity to see them in advance. But we'll just start by asking what each of us sees in the survey results and the accompanying data. And we'll do it in an orderly way. So if someone wants to start, then we'll just go around and do it one at a time.
Will you be always finishing? I've noticed that that's something you prefer to do, and I think that kind of weighs things. So would you mind participating at other times in the discussion?
Sure. As a practice, I try to, in facilitating it, I try not to make my voice be a stronger voice or have an impact. So I'd be happy to weigh in order. No problem. Does anyone want to start with what you see in the results?
So the first question is, what do I see in the survey results and the accompanying data? Is that the first question that we're answering?
Yes, please.
So I went through without looking at any conclusions, I went through both the telephone survey and the online survey myself and went through each question and kind of looked for the themes that popped out because part of my background is qualitative research, so I pulled out different themes to see what was specifically jumping out as being where parents in the community were in support or not in support. And what I saw in the results and accompanying data is a lot of what Leanne highlighted, that definitely there's an overwhelming support for later start. And then like Leanna said, when you look at the final question, question number 27, with the impact of the different impacts to the district and to families of the financial impact and the program impact, that actually those results or the support went up across the board. And so that was an interesting conclusion to see that things that we've discussed that it might have drawn that number down, it actually went up when you look at all the different impacts. We talk cautiously in the district, so related to questions 6 and 7. We talk regularly about being cautious when looking at data with small n's. So back to kind of what John I think was alluding at, or speaking to, that this can produce skewed results and swing the data disproportionately. And it's interesting to me because I think that free reduced lunch families and Hispanic families face a lot of the same barriers. Of course, there's different barriers when you are Hispanic, and you might have the language barrier and some other barriers that I might not be aware of. But when you're looking at child care, the older siblings taking care of children after school, and that you might have a single parent or both parents working out of the home for free reduced lunch populations, which may be similar to the Hispanic families. That was a question that we asked to Hispanic families. I found it interesting that with many of the same barriers faced, that free reduced lunch population, and being careful that they're both small n's, but the free reduced population overwhelmingly supported, the majority supported late start. So it'd be interesting to me to know what was impacting the Hispanic community differently, because I'm not sure that question, what were the issues that could be different in those two populations. But also that I think we need to be consistent across the board with not putting too much weight on the small ends, because when we are looking in our study sessions at achievement with various ethnic groups, we really are careful to not put too much weight if the N is small. So I think that we should have a consistency with this to do the same thing. But at the same time, we want to know what is impacting these families.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Do you want me to take a turn? Sure. So, in my analysis, to build off of Director D'Angelo, I had hoped we'd have more of a response rate from the Spanish as well, the Hispanic community, and the free and reduced lunch. But in general, I think this is a higher level of information than we've had before in terms of the community's barometer on the issue. It's nice to have something besides anecdotal, but that 48, that's just such a small in size. To move a little bit, I was very happy to have such a high response rate from the staff, 31% from the staff. I thought that was very helpful, and I think that's something that we haven't always been able to get beyond, again, the anecdotal in the past as well. And it was, I thought, interesting. I'm trying to be kind of higher level, not go by question, but their responses, I thought, were very illuminating on some of the answers where I thought perhaps they would have been more reluctant around some issues than they were, and that was very helpful to me. I'm trying to think if there were any other surprises. And again, I was surprised, first question to last question again, at how much, with all the information we had talked about, that when the survey was being built, that part of it is, making sure we quantify the issues that as a board we were struggling with, to get people's input, and still with all the information, folks' support went up. I thought that was very helpful too.
I have a question, Janet. Do the members in the audience have the questions that we're asking? Do they have a copy of those? Are they on here so people can follow along?
They are they on the table?
No, the questions they're discussing.
Yeah, I was just wondering only that so people understand like what order we're kind of going in.
Thank you, Kimberly. Can you project that up on the?
Do you want my copy of the agenda?
Thank you, Kimberly. It's good.
Otherwise it might seem strange why we're not answering certain questions yet.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to that, Amy? Okay, right. I will say that I was really surprised at the amount of overall support in the community. I think in the American Academy of Pediatrics report, it says that there's a recognition that there may be a lot of education that's required of the community to kind of sell the idea of a later start, and I was really surprised and pleased to see how much community support there is for a later start. I think, as Kimberly mentioned, there's still questions that need to be answered. I agree that that end size for the Hispanic community, and I do want to say that Leanna went to every effort that she could to find ways to gather their support, and that'll be something to work on in the future. But I have questions about whether that's really reflective of the Hispanic community feeling, and more importantly, I think I have questions about what's driving that answer. So that will come a little bit later in our discussion, but overall it was a surprise to me to see the level of support in the community, and I think it's helpful in that it gives us clearer direction on how to proceed. So I think that was really great. Yeah, Sandy?
First of all, I apologize. I had to leave what I normally do on Tuesdays to get here, so I haven't had lunch yet. So as I eat, I don't need to leave. It's a long day ahead of us. So yeah, I saw, I think what everybody else is saying, definite support in the community, and what I felt the data did for us was help clarify the work that we need to do as a board next to make this work.
I can say that I think it works.
Kimberly, you can take the
That in that first set of question number 1, I would say that one of the things that hasn't been brought out by any of the comments so far is that the people stayed with this survey. It was a long survey. It was definitely very biased feeling, and I heard a lot of complaints from the community about that. Yet they stayed with it to the end and grew in their support for later start times. So kudos to them.
Did you have any other observations on the data or anything? Was that your
Parts of
no?
the
Okay,
question
all right.
earlier.
So I guess really our next question is, what does that suggest to you? What does your reading of the data suggest? And feel free to take a minute or two to think about it before starting.
Well, I think we've already touched on the fact that, and very strongly suggest we need to move start times. I mean, that's obvious, the pretty obvious answer. So the desired outcome would be obviously moving to start time, and I think it was pretty overwhelmingly in support of definitely not any earlier than 8, for sure. I have to say I am, I think is the best way to word it. We have to be cognizant of the fact that everyone's apprehension is surrounding the cost. And that doesn't mean that the cost is something that has to stop us, but perhaps we just have to respect those hesitations and how to best go forward in a way that doesn't exacerbate the impact of the cost on the community.
What do you mean by exacerbate?
I think there are, and this is probably what we'll get into in 3, but if we go forward in a way that doesn't take into cost not just, for example, purchasing the buses, but where we have to park them and taking care of them, that there's ways of doing that sooner or later, and they have different costs associated with them, and it's not that I think one is necessarily right or wrong, but that we should bear that financial responsibility in mind. So I don't have a specific, I guess I'm not far along in my thinking to have a specific response on that. I just, of all the hesitation that I see in the survey, that seems to be the largest one. Things like, community access to fields and, after school hours, or some of the activity implications, things like that don't seem to be as much of a concern for the community, but the financial impact is, and I just wanted to state that to respect it.
I don't remember in the study that we had that there was a financial impact of where we park the buses. I don't remember that.
It's
I'm
not.
kind of
It's
wondering,
not.
is that a conversation that went on at a board meeting that I somehow wasn't in attendance?
Yeah.
So,
I think it was just an example. You were asking for specifics, and I didn't have any ready, to be honest. So I was just kind of pulling out, trying to think quickly off the top of my head what would be an impact of of how you implemented something that could have cost associated with it if you go in different ways. I don't know. I was just trying to answer your question.
So that was just out of your head?
That would be,
Or did that come from somewhere?
well, it came from support services when they, and this was in a briefing, I think you would have seen it, where in terms of ask of
I'm
the,
trying to remember that.
Yeah,
I don't remember that.
where, and it was in December, or after our last meeting in December, I put off some questions about the transport, what the status of our transportation is, how many students are getting transported to Freshman Academy was one of my specific questions. And if we could lease, and if we could lease space to park. I did have in December some specific questions about that. And so that's why.
those are the questions and the answers that you got, folks.
So it looks like the answer to that question was yes. they could park buses and district motor pools on these property at time that is owned by the jurisdiction and site is secure. So,
Well,
and
and
the capacity is at 140 to 145.
and what, this was just, I thought, a high-level response. I mean, I think the right reason we're supposed to be getting into, trying to get into a deeper level. So I don't want to preempt other folks' responses, and honestly, wanted to hear everyone's input before I got more specific, to be honest.
I did not have any idea where that was coming from.
Okay.
I've already heard some things from community members that I don't know where the numbers are coming from, or some of the ideas are bandied about, and so I just want clarity in our meeting that's in public where we're all hearing it.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would say some of the same things that Amy said, and to say it a little bit different way than you said it, but I think essentially the same thing, that really strong support, the support drops off dramatically when money is talked about, so I think that it behooves us to be prudent in that area as well. But again, very, very happy to see the data and clear instruction. So, yeah.
So I guess I'll just feed off of what Amy was saying. I guess my desired outcome is that we finally get to the how conversation. We've talked so much about whether, but we've never talked about how we want to do this. And I guess that's my desired outcome, is we finally start having those conversations. And Amy's was a great just example of we've never, as a board, talked about what the financial cost of this would be and how much we're willing to take on. And some of the other problems that will be created as a result. Anytime you solve one problem, you create another systems thinking. And so we've never talked about what are those problems and what we're willing as a district to take on as new problems, and are there ways to mitigate those new problems. So that's my desired outcome, to kind of get there.
I would agree with you that we haven't talked about ways to mitigate the negative outcomes, but we did receive a pretty large report on what cost would be or the impact would be from transportation.
We did,
So-
we never talked about, as a board, what we thought of that.
Or we've never received any answer to how we would proceed with that. So
Exactly.
I'm agreeing with you that we've never heard from staff, well, how do you make it work then?
I guess what I'm saying is that I'm looking forward to us as a board having those conversations and talking about what we see as the potential issues and are there ways to resolve those.
Okay, Dawn?
This is number 2. Desired outcomes, start school in 2015 at 8:30 for the high school. I'd like to see the junior high go to that, or the middle school. Whoever ends up being called pretty rapidly. I think that's what the American Academy of Pediatrics has suggested, more than suggested, recommended, is telling people that their kids need. I believe it's the right thing to do.
Are we on 1A or 2?
I think on 2, I just said,
Are we?
looking at the data, what's your desired
I'm
We-
outcome?
confused. I
That's
thought.
my
If you have something to add that you didn't,
Okay,
at the
well,
end
sorry.
in 1A, we
Sorry, was I
skipped
No,
and
no, I was confused,
Yeah.
and I thought we were going 1A, B. I'm sorry, that was my.
we were, but we have all sort of rolled in
Okay.
A and B into the one, so.
Right.
Right, and this conversation in addition has been going on a very long time. And I think the staff has had an extremely long time to figure out how to make it work, if they had the direction to make it work. And I think they're smart enough to see from the survey results that that direction should be forthcoming, so. There you go.
Kimberly, did you have something to add to the?
I do have to add.
Yeah,
I apologize,
please.
I thought we were going question 1 first and then A, B, so I didn't realize we were putting it all into one. So I'm going to add back to question 1 because I did have what were my surprises, so I apologize to everybody about that. So I'm going back to what are the surprises, and then what does the data suggest, and then I'll roll into 2. So questions 5, 9, 10, 16, and 17, I was surprised by, because when it comes to research and the impact on children's social, emotional, cognitive, and the academic variables, there was a high response rate in favor. In fact, it was a super majority for most of that. In fact, most respondents support later start based on research. The community supports decisions that are research-based. This is good to know and understand for our messaging should we decide to move to a later start time. There's a plethora of research regarding adolescent sleep and the support of later start times, and our community and our staff and our parents are respondent to that. And so I think putting that, the research out there, for example, from the National Sleep Foundation website, American Academy of Pediatrics, like we talked about, is really important. There's a researcher down at the University of Washington named Christopher M. Barnes, who's a specialist in sleep. He's at the Foster School of Business. Also has a lot of information, so maybe using some experts in the field to help us with that messaging would be important, and that's what I think our community is responding to. I was surprised by questions 8, I believe it's 19. Not every question that regarded finances did we get a low response rate in. When you're looking at the confidence interval of a plus or minus 5, in questions, I believe 6, 7, and 19, and I could be wrong on that, so I just wrote them down. Yes, questions 6, 7, and 19, when you're looking at the online survey that was given to the parents and staff, if you're looking at the confidence interval of plus or minus 5, it's still over the majority. It's still over 50% when you're looking at cost. And to clarify, those questions are surrounding if we were going to add 50 to 60 buses, if we were going to ask for a levy. And on question 19 is about property taxes. So it wasn't all questions, but there was a question that definitely the respondents were below 50% even when you're looking at the confidence interval. And that was question 8, which Leanne had highlighted. And this was a surprise to me, back to that question up there. When we're talking about state funding and could we lose state funding based on efficiency, then we did see quite a drop, and that wasn't above a majority. So it seemed like both the community and the staff and the parents in both surveys, they definitely were less in favor of later start if it impacted state funding. But other financial aspects of it, parents and the community were in support. And I think, to be fair, the community was less in support on the financial issues than the parents and the staff. When you're looking, so I'll give you an example. When you're looking at question 19, I believe it is, which talks about property taxes. Would you oppose later start? 56% of the community disagrees, they would not oppose it, and 65% of parents and staff. So you kind of see that disparity, but that's still above the confidence interval. It's still a majority on both sides. Does that make sense? Even if I minus the 5%, I'm still at 50% more. Another surprise to me was related to questions 10, 12, 14, 21, 22, and 26, that despite program impact, the majority of respondents support later start. And I think that's something that we had discussed as a board. That doesn't mean that there weren't areas where it went down. It did go down when we asked questions about impact, but still when you're looking at that confidence interval, when you're looking at a majority, what is the majority saying? Despite program impact, the majority do support it. When parents and staff specifically are asked the questions regarding program impact, the majority want later start and want prioritize later start over the programs. At the same time, the telephone community respondents differed in comparison to the parents and staff. that they're still within that 5%. They still did support later start. So that was a surprise to me.
So did you want to roll right over into your?
Yeah, I'm just going to